Good morning, everybody. I'm Jessica Philippe, and I work for the South Central Regional Library Council, which is one of the 9 councils across the state that make up ESLN. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll add a couple of reminders to the chat momentarily, but I'd like to get right into our presentation this morning. So it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Romanchuk. She's the Director of Libraries at Alfred University.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today. As Jessica said, I'm Michelle Romanchuk, the Director of Libraries at Alfred University and the New York State College of Ceramics, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm going to be presenting today about how our libraries made changes to the use of our building spaces, our physical spaces, during the COVID-19 pandemic in order to support the needs of students, faculty, and the library staff during that time. But particularly what I want to share is the process that we used for decision making and what were some long-term lessons that we can take away and apply to situations beyond COVID. This is how I'd like to frame things, because the building changes, the workflow, the policy changes that we made were in response to something very specific, the COVID-19, and the state or campus protocols that we had to put into place as a result. So now hopefully that specific situation will not repeat itself in my lifetime. And so therefore it's less about how did we respond to this specific issue and more about how did we respond to a difficult situation? Because a difficult situation will present itself again in some form or another. I wanted to start by giving you some context and an intro to our campus and our libraries. I know people are joining us today from a lot of different places. So I'm going to give you a little context about Alfred University. Alfred University is a small private university in Western New York. There's a statutory unit associated with SUNY, the State University of New York, and that's the New York State College of Ceramics. We have approximately 1,700 undergraduate students and 600 graduate students. At Alfred University, we have 2 libraries on our campus: Herrick Memorial Library, with resources supporting the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and the College of Business, the School of Graduate and Continuing Studies, and Samuel R. Scholes Library, which houses the resources supporting the New York State College of Ceramics. And that's comprised of the School of Art and Design and the Inamori School of Engineering. Now, the spring of 2020 semester began like so many other spring semesters and ended like nothing I have ever experienced. I created a really short timeline here because I know that different states, different universities, even within the same state, handled things differently during this time. So for us, we went on lockdown on Friday, March 20th, 2020, and we left our campus and our buildings to work remotely that Friday. And we did not return until 4 months later in July, return to our buildings on campus. During the lockdown period, we transitioned to remote work, and the libraries were closed along with the rest of our campus. And all instruction moved online for the remainder of that 2020 spring semester. Now, in July, our campus prepared for a phased reopening and return to services that were in person and on campus. And so our university did not have a robust online education format or infrastructure in place already to build on during this time. Some of our flagship programs include arts and sciences, which are very studio and lab intensive, but even the courses that could theoretically more easily be delivered online have a history of being very hands-on at our school. So it was a heavy lift for our campus to make that quick shift to remote, like to online instruction. And the libraries were part of supporting that. So since we were closed physically, we developed a LibGuide that would connect our remote services and try to communicate.
Michelle, you are getting a bit muffled. I don't know if moving closer to the microphone would help, or if it is your speaker situation.
Okay. How's that? Is that better?
I can hear you. It's a little bit more muffled. It tends to go higher and then get a little bit muffled off and on.
Okay. Do you want me to plug in my headset and see if that helps?
Sure, let's try that.
Okay. If not, I'll just. Okay. How are we doing now?
So far so good.
Okay. All right. Let's try that. But thank you. Let me know if it goes in and out again. So this is like my son's gaming headset. So hopefully.
It looks cool.
Thank you. So we really tried to create, during this time of being physically closed and separated from our physical spaces, to kind of create a temporary online space that would direct people to what we were still doing. So during lockdown, our physical spaces were transformed into primarily digital spaces, as perhaps yours were as well. But in July of 2020, we had a small. I'm not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay. So in July of 2020, we had a small group authorized to return to the buildings to prepare for the fall semester. And we were told it would be a combination of in-person, online, and hybrid classes. So we had a mission. That's the question I have up here. So we asked ourselves if we're going to need to be now opening up and being on campus in this sort of stressful and chaotic and constantly changing environment, how would we, the libraries, support online instruction while protecting the students and staff? That was really a driving question for us in how we were going to reopen our buildings, not only to students, but to our own employees as well. So we had to sort of, think about that and figure out how to change what we would normally do to this new environment. So a part of that phased reopening plan on the campus level was to figure out how to juggle the in-person, the hybrid, and the remote all at once. So I'm going to have, I'm sorry. Let me go back once and just kind of give you, this is sort of an outline of what I'm going to be talking about and show you pictures of. So some of the major changes that we did make were to, for example, to close the stacks to browsing. That was a decision that we made that really impacted how we used our buildings. We instituted a request system that I'll tell you about, sort of similar to curbside pickup. We had decided to, with the 6 feet requirement for distancing, we socially distanced all of the seating, group work areas, had to be moved and changed and distanced. Our study rooms, we ended up repurposing to allow students to actually attend Zoom classes there, because some students had in-person as well as online classes to juggle individually on their schedules, and sometimes needed a space on campus to take a Zoom class. That was not a problem I anticipated that would exist. So that was something we ended up helping with. We also suspended programming or group events for a period of time. We eventually reinstated that, but that profoundly affected how our buildings were used as well. We also established the social distancing protocols for the employee workspaces too, not just the public spaces. So that's at our service points like the front desks, and also those shared areas like break rooms. And we do have a few offices that are shared, not exclusively private offices. We had to consider staff and how to support a healthy safe work environment in those areas as well. And we also created policies and new workflows for handling materials and quarantining returned materials. And that impacted a lot of rearrangement of our workspaces and the flow of the buildings and how things were handled and set up. So that was a big task to address as well. Now, going along with all of this was making and hanging a lot of signage to support all of these changes. That is a big part of doing anything different with your buildings, is to reinforce that messaging in as positive a way as you can with signage. And I will talk a little bit more about this later, but we ended up making makeshift classrooms right in the middle of the libraries. And so right now I'm going to kind of walk you through in depth a little bit more about some of these major changes that we made to our spaces. Well, here's some slideshows here, to pictures to kind of paint the scene for you. On the left here, you can see this would be pre-COVID. We had 2 PCs to a table, lots of folks working tightly together, collaborating, something that we normally love to see in a typical situation. But on the right, you can see that the students are masked, and we spaced out computers. We actually moved computers as much as we could and did have to remove some units to provide those distancing requirements in the open areas. Also, our service desks this is just one of our front desks, is the front desk. Those had to be distanced and thought of from 2 aspects: the staff to patron aspect, and then the staff to staff aspect of safety on the other side of that plexiglass screen. So both sides of the plexiglass screen had to be considered in terms of use of space. So we got screens, and here we're measuring for where to place, how to stand and how to approach the desk and things like that. But here's an example of, on the other side, and a student worker at a newly distanced workstation. We actually had to remove one of the stations because we physically couldn't distance enough. And so that space requirement that meant that we had to use our space differently also meant that we needed to staff differently. So there wasn't actually room for as many people to be working at the same time the way they previously had. So we did have to change our staffing model as well due to some of the changes happening in the building. So here's the other schools library front desk. And you can see on the left, it was intentionally designed to be very open, very approachable. It doesn't even really have necessarily a front that you have to approach by. It's intentionally rounded, meaning that you can kind of come around it, and the screen has this arm where you can turn the screen right with the patron and stand right next to them to work. And so on the right, you can see the COVID setups where we used carts to block off and actually creating the barrier that we had intentionally removed when we did a redesign. This is a relatively new renovation. It's only a few years old. So it felt like going backwards in that respect, but with reason. And I mentioned signage. So here's some examples of signage that the university provided that would be seen all over campus. And so this was all installed around the libraries. But what we tried to do with our own signage was to make it similar in the aesthetic. I copied some of the colors and things like that, but also tried to make it very, very positive as much as I can, and communicate to reinforce the new policies or the new uses of space. I try to make signage as much as possible like do this, or you can do this, rather than like no or don't. It's hard to sometimes get away from that language, but as much as possible, try to make the signage recognizable and positive. Here's a couple other examples, and this is showing how we tried to communicate like closed stacks on the left, for example. So instead of like do not or don't touch or closed, tried to message it positively, like this is how you can access materials. Also, I had mentioned, like many libraries, we instituted item pickup and request. And so the systems team worked hard to create in Primo, in our discovery system, and the ability to search the catalog and then just with the click of a button, request it for pickup. And so these carts are how we created contactless pickup. And so this required rearranging the foyers to have where students or faculty or staff could come in and just pick up their bag that had been packed for them. And so we had, so it wasn't curbside, it was like foyer pickup. I saw some universities calling it like library takeout, just trying to make the messaging as engaging as possible during a very stressful and potentially negative thing, trying to message it positively and welcomingly as best you can in that situation. So and what I wanted to share with you as well is that as a university known for our small classes, the average class size is 18, and our student faculty ratio is 13:1. And so we don't have a lot of large classrooms that allow for 6 feet distancing. Our campus has a lot of older buildings, and many are not well ventilated. So this is a picture in one of our buildings, Kanakadia Hall. It was originally a 19th century schoolhouse. It's absolutely gorgeous. But you can see that people are sitting very closely, and this doesn't, it's like the old wooden windows that can be hard to open. There's no air conditioning or anything like that. And so this is just one example of a classroom. But when it became known to us in libraries that one of the biggest challenges on our campus was finding enough classroom space to hold distanced, properly the 6 feet distance in-person classes, that was something that inspired us to transform our spaces, because there were so many other services that due to the restrictions, we couldn't provide. And however, we did look around and say, well, one thing we do have is large, well-ventilated spaces. And so that's when we undertook our biggest lift as far as COVID setups. And we created makeshift socially distanced classrooms right in the middle of the libraries. Well, let me show you what I mean. So here's an example of a really popular group workspace in Scholes Library. And so we have, students here for an event, and we have these great wooden tables that, a lot of the students will collaborate on, and whiteboard walls back there that you find thermodynamics calculations on, all the time, things like that. Well, this space was transformed here into a classroom, and here is a professor teaching a poli-sci class. Right in the middle of there's some theses collection just out of the shot. We had another class meeting in L through Z up here, by normally a group work study area with tables for collaboration. It's just surrounded by L through Z by moving the furniture, setting up a projector. If there wasn't any technology in these open areas of libraries before, working with ITS to do that. Also, here's another example. So this is the knitting club meeting in the commons area of Scholes Library, well loved for its comfy chairs and couches. And so this space became transformed into a classroom as well. The soft seating had to be removed, and we found as many nooks and crannies to store it as we could, and brought tables from other locations, set up a projector and a podium. And here is an English class meeting in the middle of the reference collection in Scholes Library. So this is a profoundly different use of the libraries than we have ever undertaken before. And so these were big decisions that we had to make. So I'm saying we as in the libraries, but also I'm the director of libraries, and then we have a dean of libraries, Brian Sullivan. And so some of those decisions, we had to make together very quickly, and others we could make as a library or at the team level, and had a timeline to maybe discuss and just workshop some different ideas. Really depended on what the situation was. But now I want to share a little bit about how we made these decisions. So one of the things, and honestly, this is looking back and realizing that this is kind of what we did, and knowing that this is what we did is going to help me in the future maybe do this more intentionally and know that this process worked. So one of the things that really helped was to have a process, communicate, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of these things individually. But we tried to consider the impact of whatever the decision was, and then tried to keep in mind that you might not, get it right, quote unquote. That there might not always be one clear or correct answer. So let's take these one at a time. So with, what kind of process did we use? Well, it really helped to look externally at what expert advice, or as best as we could find, what guidance was there. So I watched a lot of those, the IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I watched a lot of their COVID-19 webinars that they had, where they were doing studies on the life of the virus on common library materials. That informed a lot of our decisions for the spaces involving handling of materials or quarantining or patron access to resources. The Northeast Document Center, if you're not familiar with it, or Northeast Document Conservation Center, if you're not familiar with it, is a very well-known source for related to like preservation of materials. And they also issued some bulletins. They actually have a great whole site just on library disaster resource management in general. That would be great to consult for a variety of situations. But we turn to them for handling of our physical collection as well. And also tried to keep on top of monitoring CDC and local health department guidance, particularly for the aspects of masking, distancing, return to work protocols, things like that. Another very helpful thing for our decision-making process was, as much as the timeline allowed, to expand the conversation as much as we could to, I think I attended every Zoom webinar I could find related to anything about use of space or library services. But also, there were a lot of helpful opportunities to consult with colleagues around SUNY, to turn to our peers to see, and there was quite a variety of how people were handling things, but having that sounding board to talk to was helpful. And I got a lot of value from the SCRLC regular Zoom meetings that were provided to talk with other directors and other topics, to just try to share ideas and advice. I took a lot of the comfort in being able to talk to other people during this time about how they were handling things. But very importantly, we also made sure to turn inwardly and expand the conversation outside of library leadership as well, to the rest of our librarians and staff as much as possible, and make sure that we are taking ideas from a lot of the people that we're actually going to execute the work. And as much as anything could be a team decision, or depending on what it was. So like with the item request system, talking to the systems team or the ILL team, public services, as much as we could include others and get input, we try to do that. And that helps people feel engaged and have some agency in constructing what is a safe work environment. For communication, of course, communication is always important. We all know that. But I feel like it hit a new level of all-time high of importance during COVID. So it was important to us in the libraries to share the how and why decisions or changes were being made. So, if people don't have a sense of the process or of where decisions are coming from, they'll just fill in the gaps themselves. And so it's important to say if there is process, what that process is, and why we're doing something. And I think that really helps receive changes and receive maybe new guidance or directions a little bit more. We also, I found it was very helpful to be clear about who the decision maker is, but not in a way that passes the buck of like, oh, it's just this campus administration said this. Like, there's a positive way of just being clear about that, and because I think it can communicate what latitude we have, because a lot of times there was a campus decision made. However, and maybe that's not something we can change. However, we could maybe have some agency of how to apply it. There's still maybe some decisions that we can make, some changes we can make to our spaces, to our physical environment. So it was, if something's a state mandate, obviously we're not going to change that. If that's not something that we can just ignore or change. But if we say, well, we're starting with this external decision, now here's where we're going to go from there. That also helps people, I think, feel engaged and empowered and understand the process. But it's also important to just, if there is a difficult decision to be made, we made a lot of changes to the buildings, and it was sometimes very overwhelming. That's just the way the situation. I remember COVID. I don't mean to talk like it's completely past tense, but the height of it, was it has evolved a bit. The height of it is how I just felt very overwhelmed sometimes. And if something was a decision that just I need to make, then I would just say that you have to own your own decisions as well. Be clear about that. I also think that one of the things that I learned was that it's very important to communicate regularly and proactively. So here's what I mean by that. The work environment changed for us for exclusively working on site. There was not really an option for remote work at my institution prior to this. So we were exclusively working on site to then working for a time completely remotely to then having a time of some combination. Some people are doing remote work, some people are doing on-site work, and some people are doing a little bit of both. So how do you keep everybody together as a team? Well, one of the things that we did was we did have a regular schedule of Zoom meetings, even though everybody got Zoomed out at some point, right? And maybe you're still feeling that way. But having a predictable frequency of meetings, of scheduled meetings, and the frequency you can adjust to, of course, whatever is appropriate for your organization, for your team. But the fact that there was some kind of expected schedule was helpful, because then people knew there was going to be a regular interval of communication shared, but not just one direction, right? So that they also would have a regular interval of being able to respond and share and give feedback and check in. So it goes both ways. So our dean and myself as director would share updates and changes whenever we could, but also provide that venue for others to share as well. Another thing that our dean and I did was to send a Friday update, a weekly email of just announcements, reminders. This is also something that's on a predictable interval. But it also served not just as like a recap and a list of reminders, but it was an effort to create more togetherness. We included birthdays, playlists of songs, pictures, things that we might share if we were together in person. So that was also something that just was engaging and something to look forward to, and another way to feel like a team when we were dispersed. So, but I want to explain to you what I mean by proactively communicate, because this is something I found out along the way. I kind of didn't initially start out with this mindset. But there were several times when, for example, maybe the governor of New York announced a new restriction, or there was a press release, or maybe our campus administration would announce a new policy via email, and everybody gets the message at the same time. There's no sneak peek for anybody. So everybody gets that update, that change, that new COVID restriction at the same time. So in that situation, proactively communicating would mean just sending a quick message to everybody, like, we've just been made aware of this, and we're going to be interpreting it and looking into it to see how it applies to the libraries. Send us any questions that you have, or maybe other thoughts, reactions, if people have suggestions. So just basically communicate, like, we're on it, we're aware of this, but also give people an opportunity to feel like they can be a part of that decision-making process and that communication. That was helpful because other times, sometimes before we did that, when those messages would just hit, then people well, did you see this? And like, well, what are we going to do? And people want to be involved and engaged, but just hearing that first provided some structure and some comfort of inclusion and hey, we're going to solve this. What are we going to do? The next aspect of decision-making process about all these changes we made was we tried very hard to consider the impact of decisions. Something that really became clear to me at the height of the COVID and all of the restrictions and building changes we were making was that a lot of these decisions impacted the changes, the COVID restrictions, the changes. They impacted staff, librarians who at our campus are faculty, and students really differently. And that was important to consider. So for example, faculty in their contracts, due to the nature of their work, have a lot more latitude for remote work than the staff. And so this was a gap that we identified, and we saw that it did cause some stress for people. And so our library leadership, the dean and myself, tried to address this with providing more flexibility with staff duties and with remote work locations to try to even that out. And our dean advocated very heavily for a more official policy for remote work for staff. But that was just one example of something that affected different groups differently. Another example would be with the mask requirements. Students were more impacted by that than others. Students, the residential college, students had to wear their masks much more than anyone else, because when I go home, I can take my mask off, or I can close my office door and eat my lunch and take a mask break, or work for a while with my office door closed and no mask on. But the students had to wear them much more, and in the communal areas of the residence halls. So even when they go home, unless they're just in their room alone with their roommate, they had to wear it to the bathroom, into the kitchen. And so although that's all understandable, it was also fatiguing for students. And I would say they were overwhelmingly very cooperative about it. But as I said, it just was sometimes fatiguing. And so this led us in the libraries to repurpose the study rooms, which used to be acceptable for, used by one person or used by groups, to be one person only, and as a place to sort of mimic what I was describing as, if I'm in my office, I can close the door and unmask. So we mimicked that campus allowance by allowing students to either study in there or attend a Zoom class as a place that they could unmask under certain parameters. So they had to have the door closed, as was the expectation in offices. But we also researched what was the exchange rate of the air according to ASHRAE standards. And we ended up giving it like a break between study room reservations, so that otherwise it defeats the purpose and you're just sharing air, and it's not really addressing the issue. And so we gave a rest period in between reservations to allow the air to change over before the next person could use it unmasked. So that was something we didn't initially do, but when we saw the need, we modified our services to be able to do that. This, I think, advice applies to a lot of situations, but it really rang true for us here. So it was really important to acknowledge that not is going to be happy with any given decision or change, but even so, it's even more important then to have a process and to communicate what decisions are and why they're important, and to take responsibility for making those decisions. Well, there isn't always a right answer, and this is there rarely is just one way of doing something. And so many of our colleagues in library land did very different things with their buildings and their spaces or their work arrangements, and that's okay. I said a few times along the way in all staff meetings or in emails along the way during COVID that we're just going to make the best decisions that we can with the information that we have. And I remember saying that, look, it's entirely possible that we will look back at some point and see that at times, maybe we were more cautious than we needed to be about something. We might look back and say, okay, we didn't need to do that. Maybe we didn't need to quarantine materials, or maybe we didn't need to have that cleaning schedule for services. Maybe we didn't need to close the stacks to browsing. But personally, I would rather look back with the knowledge that I have now and say, okay, well, maybe we didn't need to do some of that. But I would rather say that than look back and say, I'm sorry that I didn't do more, or I'm sorry I didn't support you more, or I'm sorry that I didn't, listen to your concerns more, that kind of thing. But this is a personal decision for me and how I approach things. Some of the lessons that we learned. A couple of things. One of which is that it was amazing to see all of the creative solutions that we were able to come up with. It was amazing to see everybody coming together and coming up with new uses for the libraries, or new ways to support students and new ways to use the buildings than we had ever envisioned before. So it also revealed to us what a multifunction space the libraries are, something I think we intellectually knew, but we really saw it play out. The libraries are an academic building. They're a classroom. They can be a recreational or a lounge space. Sometimes they're like a dining hall with students eat there. So when new campus guidance was announced, maybe like about when you're supposed to mask or not, or where you can eat or not, it was not always clear how that affected the libraries, because we're at an intersection of a lot of things. So what category of our services did we fall in any given situation? That's where we had to kind of do some interpretation and come up with creative solutions that were going to support everybody involved. One of the things that I'm constantly reminding about is that I need to take more pictures. We come up with creative and interesting ideas and things and events. This is just a general statement. And I am profoundly bad at remembering to take pictures. And so I just want to make sure that I throw that in there to remind you as well, because it's great to be able to look back on that. But there's so much more that I could have documented to show you, but I'm just not a person that thinks of that. So I try to have others help me remember to take pictures and have that visual story to tell about what you're doing in your libraries and how you solve problems or what creative things you come up with in general. I think one of the most profound lessons for me was that the situation showed us what we value in libraries. So, that really was that people are something that we value. People are our people, not only the staff, but the students and faculty, our community is really the most valuable and irreplaceable thing. So safety above service and stats. Just accepting this is not going to be a record circulation year. It's not going to be record headcount, but that those things don't define us. Those things don't measure our worth or our value as libraries or as people providing services, and that you can control the narrative and tell the story of your value with other metrics, and just accepting that the stats aren't going to be good, and that's okay, because that's not the point. The point is to support people and make people feel safe going to work, or as best you can. And so that was something that was a driving force in how we used our buildings and how we provided services. I also think it showed us that in a challenging time, regardless of what the situation is, but in a challenging time, it's okay to stop doing something or to stop offering a service. I think in libraries, many of us are attracted to libraries because we're givers, with that personality. And I think in libraries in general, we are profoundly bad at recognizing when it's okay to stop doing something. Like maybe it's okay to stop providing that service or stop doing something. I think that can be hard sometimes. But that's okay. You need to do that sometimes, because everything cannot be a priority all at the same time. And in a difficult situation, we might have to accept longer timelines or lower productivity because it's people first. Remember, sometimes that is just the way it is. And one of the things too that I take away from this is that you can adjust and adapt to just about any situation and do amazing things to meet your community's needs. But that does not mean that you have to meet every need, or can do it all at once, or have to take on more that is really sustainable or reasonable. So you can't do everything, and you don't have to. I am prone to vocational awe, if you're familiar with that. I do want to believe in my job, and I want to believe in the mission of libraries, and I want to work in an environment that I feel is impactful and meaningful. But if you're not familiar with Fabazi Itar's article on vocational awe, I would encourage you to read it, because the author warns that if you are swept up in vocational awe, then you can just give all of yourself to, now in this situation, it's libraries, but it could be any job really, but that you don't have to sacrifice yourself or endanger yourself in order for your work to be meaningful. So I want to end with a couple of pictures to bring us kind of full circle from this fall, where we were able to start reinstating some things. We were able to start doing some programs again and change our services along the way. So here we have students playing mini golf in the libraries. So here's an example of one of the first events, maybe even the first event we reinstated in the libraries. And you can see now we have people moving through the stacks. We've put the furniture back and have dismantled the classrooms. But these are just examples of working back, phasing back in things and folding them in with the COVID protocols as they changed. And so I just have referenced a couple of things here. And so that's all I have for the presentation. And I would love to hear what questions you might have. I'm going to stop the share.
Thanks, Michelle. That was a good point about taking before and after photos, for sure. I see you have some good ones. I haven't been to your library in probably 3 years, and it looks very different from the last time I was there.
Yes, thank you.
So any questions for Michelle? Yeah, just some agreements and definitely a lot of insights there. We can give people another minute to mull things over. And I think the headset helped, but unfortunately it didn't totally solve the problem.
Oh, okay.
So I had to
I'm sorry.
Up and down a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So any questions? Yeah, there was a comment earlier. I know Jill Hurst-Wall is doing our closing session today, so she had to leave, but she left a comment early on. I don't know if you attended our morning session. We had a student panel that had a lot of really good insights, and this was regarding incentives She said perhaps put a pack of tissues in the library takeout bags. And
Oh,
she was also
yeah.
thinking that library takeout might continue in the future in a lot of
Yes. Well, so what we've done, and that's something that we have done, but it's just not contactless. We modified it a little bit, but we had initially thought that item request feature would just be a temporary thing. And it actually was very popular. And so we don't bag it and put it in the foyer anymore. It goes on the whole shelf, but we do find that people just enjoy being able to choose things in the catalog and pick them up. And that's very common in public libraries. I'm accustomed to that, but that was not something that we'd had. So that's something that we kept. I'd be curious if anybody else wants to share something that they have continued, or I'd be happy if anybody else wanted to just say what's going on in their libraries or some things, any kind of similar. To making classrooms in the middle of our libraries was very unexpected. That's not something that, I could have ever envisioned us doing. So, and did anybody else do want to share anything that they did for COVID in their spaces?
Was that classroom space where you had the roof leak, Michelle, years back?
Oh,
It looked familiar.
We did have I started writing about that and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'll probably get off on a tangent, but in 2020 we had some water piping leak, and so we also had like a flood and extensive water damage like during lockdown as well. So that's just the similar place, but no, that was the reserve areas where we keep all of the like returned books that we're going to reshelve. That's what got hit with all. Could have been worse though.
Right. And Karen from Ithaca College was saying a lot of the same things that you implemented and are probably continuing with are happening there as well. Yeah, and Kathy sharing they were virtual. She's also from Ithaca College. So she's saying they were virtual in fall of 2020 and then mostly virtual in spring 2021. She returned to her office in August of 2021. And then people were mostly back by fall of 2021, but some staff still keep hybrid schedules.
Yes, that sounds very familiar. And it also, I think, showed us that there is more remote work possible in libraries than like we had considered before, or hybrid, that we do provide so much in person and hands-on that I think we had not really considered what flexibility there is until we were kind of put in the situation and forced to. And we do have now where people can just like, oh, I'm going to work from home today. And that had not been a thing before. So it showed us how flexible we can be and how agile we can be, I think, as well. That sounds similar. I take a lot of guidance from Ben Hogben at Ithaca College. He's an access services rock star, if you don't know him. So he inspires me a lot in how he takes that student care approach to everything.
He does.
Yeah. I stole a fantastic idea from him. It's a little bit off topic, but I wanted to share because it's a great idea. I manage the student workers and I always had like, here are my expectations. And this is what I expect from the job, right? But Ben has a working agreement and I love that concept. So he's like, these are my expectations for you. And this is what you can expect from me. Like, here's the support that we're going to give you. I just love that approach. And I try to take that for just about everything, that mindset of back and forth. And this is like, we're in this together. So I think that's something that
I think the students need that.
Here. Yeah.
So Claire is also saying, I appreciate your comments about equity, basically about the staff and librarians in regards of who could do their work from home and feel safer in the pandemic.
I think based on who is listening today, it's okay for me to say that was not an official policy that we had. We were like, if I was going to ask HR, they would say, no, staff need to work in person. That's not a thing. But we just didn't ask my dean and I. And so tried to be like, well, this is what we're going to do. And use that, then later share that great example as like, hey, we've been doing this and it's been working fine. Like, what? So that sometimes, I don't know what's that about begging for forgiveness, but we tried to really find like what latitude we could have, because I do think that was a huge inequity for people that you're expressing there. I think that happens to a lot of people.
Yeah. And since we were shouting out Ben Hogbin, he is doing a lightning round presentation today on the library and animal assisted activities. Let's pause for a moment. So that's at 1:00 today.
I would recommend that.
Yeah, and Claire's saying she worked at a public library at the very beginning of the pandemic, and there was nothing done to address that difference in staff roles and assumed health risks. And as a result, there was a lot more toxicity amongst the staff.
Yeah, I think it's hard because this was just such a distillation of anything. The situation really distilled anything that maybe was on the surface, or just something that maybe you didn't really have to confront and address, like something like those work inequities or the lack of flexibility that people have in different roles. I think a lot of it was just kind of blown up, and that's good. It challenges us to ask us our questions. Why is it this way, and find solutions.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Michelle. And I know you're in Virginia today, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit in Virginia.
Yeah, I hope everyone is enjoying the conference. And thank you so much, Jessica, for all the work you've done organizing, not just moderating today, but all the work you did organizing and making the conference successful. So shout out to SCRLC2 for all the things that you do there. Great resource.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.